So this is my final project for EDL 681. It's a residence life professional staff development activity that I have designed using technology. So the context for the lesson is really that housing staff really need to be able to articulate how they are contributing to student learning. So this session would be an introductory level guide to developing a culture of assessment or contributing to a culture of assessment. Explaining how we write student learning into a comprehensive assessment plan, and then teaching staff to utilize direct assessments for assessing student learning in their communities. And most importantly, teaching staff to tell the story about what students are learning from their on-campus housing experience. I would see it lasting about 2 hours and then taking place either in August during the onboarding process or early in the year as a professional staff development activity. When I thought about the learning outcomes, it was important for me to tap into Bloom's at the different levels. So using Bloom's taxonomy as the guide, learning opportunities can promote higher forms of thinking, so getting to the analyzing and creating rather than just remembering the facts. So I think these learning outcomes represent learning at least 3 different levels of Bloom's taxonomy. And I also think that these learning outcomes communicate high expectations. And high expectations are an important part of the learning process and are good practice in undergraduate student learning. And although these are not undergraduate students, I think we can tap into the best practices when thinking about how we design training and professional staff development. So in thinking about this lesson, I wanted to make sure that it wasn't a standalone event, and I think technology could help bring that to life. So my idea is that prior to the lesson that I would send out an email to the participants. And in the Teaching Naked book, the author really articulated how email can be a strategy when thinking about integrating technology into the learning process. And when I think about my staff and where they are in their professional journey, email is not an outdated form of technology for them. For some of them, it's the technology in which they feel most fluent in using. So the idea behind the email is that it's an opportunity for me to convey my passion around the subject, to convey the importance of it, to provide some why for my millennial staff members, why we're talking about this, and to really set us up for a successful learning experience. Within that email, I would also ask the participants to view a TED Talk. And for this lesson, I'm using Every Kid Needs a Champion by Rita Pierson. And the purpose of the video is really to get participants thinking about their roles as educators. And what we know about videos is that similar to podcasts, they allow participants to learn at their own pace. They can rewind, they can pause, and they can take notes. Videos are also one way to connect with diverging learning styles, and that divergers like to gather information. They rather watch than do. And I also think the content of this video would help connect with the sensitive nature of divergers. Also within that email, I would introduce the participants to Twitter and to the hashtag. Again, recognizing that I have a team in very different places with their understanding of technology, specifically Twitter. It would be important to talk about why we're using Twitter and to share some resources for staff new to that technology. One, so that they knew how to use it, but 2, also to get their buy-in and to get them excited about using that technology. Because 1, it's important for us to learn it because our students are utilizing it, and it's a way for us to reach our undergraduate students in our roles as educators. And then when we come together, the actual lesson would review these components. So starting off talking about the learning outcomes, right? By teaching people about the learning outcomes, we're really challenging them to take ownership for their learning experience, that it's this thing that they're a part of and that it's not happening to them. Providing context about the topic, talking about what a comprehensive assessment plan looks like, how assessing student learning fits into that, giving them some tools for their toolbox so as they think about going back to their residential communities and how they assess student learning. this concept of closing the loop with data, and then how we create and sustain a culture of assessment within our department, and then finally wrapping up with some hands-on practice. So in thinking about this overall lesson, it's going to be important for me, if I'm using technology well, to integrate this throughout the lesson and not just at one or 2 points. So the technology that I think about using in this lesson, first and foremost, the email. That was the email that went out in advance. The video, which I talked about, which was the TED Talk. Twitter, and creating this online learning community via hashtag and getting them to engage with the information and one another so that they're not just passively sitting there observing the information. One tool that I really like is TweetBeam. So I would see this presentation having 2 screens, one for the PowerPoint and one for TweetBeam. And TweetBeam is a Twitter wall. So all of the tweets using the hashtag will scroll through, and it's a way for people who maybe are not on Twitter or who are resistant to Twitter to be exposed to the tweets so that Twitter's accessible to them and that they can participate and still reflect and engage, and hopefully make Twitter a little less scary for those individuals. And then the final bit of technology I would utilize would be word clouds. I like the website Wordle, but one of the first assignments would be from the email for people to tweet out some thoughts about the video that they watched, and I would put those words into a word cloud and then send that back out to the team ahead of time. It's a great informative assessment tool, a formative assessment tool, and it also kind of mirrors back to participants what their fellow learners are thinking or feeling. And then as we learned in class, that it's important that technology is fully integrated into the lesson. So hopefully you'll see through the lesson plan that it's planned and purposeful, that it's integrated throughout, that technology is mostly used by the participants, right? So it's not me up there showcasing technology, but they're utilizing it while I'm sharing information. That the technology is used to engage students with the content, right? I'm asking them to reflect back on questions, to share out thoughts and ideas and resources. And then it encourages that higher order thinking. Again, not using Twitter to regurgitate the facts, but to think about how the information applies to their professional life and to share those thoughts out. And then in designing this lesson, being really intentional about thinking about Kolb's learning process. And so at the very end of the lesson, the participants are going to practice using 2 of the classroom assessment techniques. So they're actually going to practice using a 1-sentence summary and the muddiest point. It's important that they experiment with those if they're going to ask their students to participate in those activities. And then, so the concrete experience is that they're going to participate in engaging in 2 cats, and then I'm going to break them up into 2 smaller groups. One group will look at the 1-sentence summary, one group will look at the muddiest point, and they're going to take a turn at practicing analyzing the data that was collected from those classroom assessment techniques, and that's the concrete experience. In the reflective observation, in those small groups, I want them to discuss 3 questions about their data set. What, so what, and now what? What do they see in the data? Why is that important? And then what would they do with that information? And then for abstract conceptualization as a small group, participants will discuss how this applies to their work as educators and as housing professionals. How could these cats be used to define problems, solve problems, or to make decisions as related to student learning? And finally, with the active experimentation, each individual will take a current lesson plan that they use for the residential curriculum and rewrite the assessment portion of the lesson plan using what they've learned in this activity and during the session. And again, good practice in undergraduate education encourages active learning. And although these are not undergraduate students, the participants need to be able to apply their learning to their professional worlds. And then finally, we'll assess the learning outcomes using a 3-2-1 activity. Participants will receive an index card. They'll be asked what are 3 direct assessments that can be utilized to assess student learning and events in your residence hall? What are 2 strategies you can help implement to create a culture of assessment within our department? And what is 1 word that describes your thoughts about assessing student learning now that you have participated in the session? Using the hashtag, I would ask participants to tweet out their 1 word. And if I was successful, the tweets would reveal that staff were feeling less scared, more competent, and perhaps even more excited excited about assessing student learning. And then finally, I would take the one word and create a word cloud using a Wordle software to look for themes to develop future training and professional development content, but also to push that information back to the participants as a way of modeling closing the loop. And that is my lesson.